Hi, this is Jim Couri again. I am doing this particular tape today, which is a little atypical of some of the tapes that I've already recorded, because I have now become the victim and target of a extortion scheme by George Pavia, his minion puppeteer, or I should say puppet, Ken Gomez, John Siebert, and Joe Burke. These people have created lies and then fault me for the lies that they've created. Mr. Gomez, fronting for Pavia, has published scurrilous documents, not only scurrilous but false, many of them created by their own misdeeds, all to try to stop, by intimidation, my efforts, and Scam Raiders' efforts, by the way, that has truly uncovered their corruption and criminal behavior. Now, that having been said, I think it's important that I explain exactly what is going on. In order for me to do that, I first have to refer all of you to Scam Raiders. In Scam Raiders' archives, you will find a plethora of documentation of the corruption, bribery, larceny, spoliation, and illegal behavior of George Pavia, Ken Gomez, John Siebert, and Joe Burke. Also, you will be able to look at my biography. Now, unlike Mr. Gomez, when we write an article at Scam Raiders accompanies that with documentary evidence, whether it be a court pleading or other pieces of evidence. In my biography, you will find numerous documents concerning my activities. Now, Mr. Gomez chooses to want to exhume ancient history. It is true that in 1975, I became involved with Edward M. Gilbert and Johnny Revson, the son of Charles Revson, the founder of Revlon, in a stock manipulation regarding a company called Conrac on the New York Stock Exchange. And it is true that I did take a criminal plea of a one-count match trade and a false statement to a bank. And it is true that I pled guilty to those two infractions and was given a short probationary period. But what also is true is that I became a key government witness, and my testimony became the cornerstone of that trial, in which Mr. Gilbert was not only convicted of all counts, but was sentenced to prison. Not a pleasant fact, but the fact of the matter is that I performed my civic duty. The government wrote many accolades about me. Judge Lasker, in his sentencing memorandum, wrote accolades about me. As a matter of fact, the United States Attorney states, Couri's cooperation with this office has been extensive and of great value to law enforcement. We believe that Couri has endeavored to testify truthfully, and virtually every important aspect of Couri's testimony has been corroborated in a great deal by reference to documentary evidence and other witnesses. In 2002, I was awarded the Medal of Freedom by Senator Frist, who says, I am proud to present you with the Senatorial Medal of Freedom, the most prestigious honor the Republican members of the United States Senate can bestow upon any individual. Few Americans take on such responsibility or play such a personally active role in America's government such as you have. Indeed, this is why you are one of the few individuals in New York to be recognized as a Republican Senatorial Medal of Freedom recipient. In addition to that, I have been active in tax reformation, and I have been active in many other political activities, including functioning on the Presidential and Congressional Business Council. Mr. Gomez chooses to try to extort me and intimidate me. It's not going to work, Mr. Gomez. It's not going to work, Mr. Pavia. Let me tell you a little bit about George Pavia, and then I'll tell you a little bit about John Siebert, and I'll tell you a little bit about Ken Gomez and Joe Burke. George Pavia was born in 1928. His father, Enrico, was a fascist sympathizer living in Italy, working hand in glove with Benito Mussolini. Now, by the way, all of these documentary facts are available. When Mussolini's crew found out that Enrico and George were engaging in black market activities, they were looking for him. George and Benito left the country. George found himself in America, fashioned himself as an elitist, ended up marrying a lady who was a doctor, Ellen Solomon. Miss Solomon was married to George for a number of years until they parted company. They divorced. During that time, George lived well off Miss Solomon in her rent-control apartment, which, by the way, after she died, although George wasn't married to her for 15 years, tried to tell the rent stabilization that the DHCR, he was entitled to those rights. All a matter of record also. George Pavia then began to court Miss Pierce, Antonia Pierce, whose parents had money. They married. The Pierces lived on 77th Street off Fifth Avenue. They were kind enough to bestow upon George and his wife a new townhouse on 73rd Street. The townhouse that I resided in until George Pavia and his wife swindled me out of regarding rent stabilization after they compromised Judge Madden. George Pavia is one of the first-class swindlers of the 20th and 21st century. George Pavia misused the court system. George Pavia swindled his in-laws out of the shares of stock of their home, or I should say the deed of their home, by peeling off piece by piece like one would peel an onion to himself, his wife, and his adult child, all without gift tax and all forged. That 77th Street property is now where Mrs. Pavia operates something called the New School on 15 East 77th Street. Miss Pavia is a painter, she purports herself as. But in the meanwhile, they've enriched themselves to the tune of about $15 or $20 million for that townhouse. Now, after that, Mr. Pavia entered into a litigation with me, lied at the ECB court, filed forged documents at the Department of Buildings, stole my Medicare proceeds, stole, I use the word stole accurately, with the help of Mr. Gomez and with the help of Russo and Burke and with the help of Dr. John Siebert. That's just a fraction of some of the things I could sit here and tell you about George Pavia and his swindles and his con games. This troll has harassed me, has extorted me, has stolen my rent stabilization rights by compromising courts, and then he wants to be rewarded by the very orders that Judge Madden issued to save him his rent-stabilized building so that every tenant in that building would lose those rights. Now let's talk for a minute about Dr. John Siebert. Dr. Siebert met me because I was a close friend of Michael Hogan. Dr. Siebert bought Michael Hogan's practice. Dr. Siebert told me he was a multimillionaire and wanted to invest in various activities. He asked me to do some work for him. We entered into a myriad of agreements, all of which Siebert defaulted on. Siebert not only misused my records, but committed major tax evasion. Siebert not only committed major tax evasion, but he swindled 4 or 5 patients, including me, Mrs. Zimmerman for a couple of $1 million, Ben Osman for a couple of $1 million, Richard Jacobs for $500,000. This guy's a piece of work. He fashions himself as being a first-class plastic surgeon. He's a first-class phony. What Dr. Siebert has done is swindled me, formed an unholy alliance with Pavia in order to compromise the courts. Now, it's not just me. It's just me who's speaking out. One of these days, when Senator Sampson permits his committee to meet again, you're going to see all kinds of other people speaking out. If you want to look at the federal court calendar, you'll see probably 36 cases in the federal court system in the Southern District concerning matters that today are being adjudicated concerning court corruption in New York, White Plains, Nassau, and in Brooklyn.